How to fix a broken union. The government wants to clean up the CFMEU, but ending the culture of kickbacks, standover tactics and underworld infiltration isn't proving easy. I'm David Speers. Welcome to Insiders. We'll be taking a good look this morning at the political drama unfolding in the United States. Joe Biden is digging in as the list of Democrats urging him to go grows longer and the party's crisis deepens. Donald Trump, meanwhile, is doubling down on what his loyal base wants, picking a running mate promising greater protectionism as the solution to working class woes. Here, blue-collar workers, or at least some of their union leaders, have also been in focus for all the wrong reasons. The CFMEU is in crisis after damning new revelations of bikies infiltrating its ranks, threatening behaviour and cash kickbacks. It's created all sorts of headaches for Labor too.
Australia's most powerful building union, the CFMEU, is in damage control tonight after the Victorian branch was placed into administration today amid a swag of allegations.
I'd lose my job, I don't care. You're the expert who get fixes grounds trying to be.
Do you think this is systemic?
Well, it's certainly not fixed by John Sector leaving.
So there's no question that you've been ignoring allegations made against the CFMEU because you were fearful of the union's power and influence?
No, of course not.
They must be rooted out.
Do you accept responsibility?
I absolutely accept we need to take further strong action.
Allegations of criminal and corrupt conduct inside the CFMEU have spread from Victoria to other states.
Labor distancing itself from the embattled division of the CFMEU in New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia and Tasmania.
Suspend them from all parts of the New South Wales Labor Party, to not take affiliation or donations from that union.
Labor leaders are being shamed, accused of inaction against allegations of criminal infiltration, corruption and intimidation by the CFMEU.
As normally happens here, Premier Minns and Premier Malinauskas show the leadership that the Prime Minister can't demonstrate.
Labor's national executive has cut ties and blocked donations from the CFMEU's construction division as it tries to distance itself from the powerful union.
Sending in an independent administrator to clean up the CFMEU.
As there has been an escalation in the evidence, there has been an escalation in the government's response.
Prompting an extraordinary spray directed at the Prime Minister.
In a statement, the union's Queensland secretary said Albanese has panicked and soiled himself.
The weakest possible response from Anthony Albanese would be to appoint an administrator to the CFMEU.
The CFMEU needs to be deregistered, gone, finished, start again.
We will ensure that culture changes, and that's why the elements like John Sector have no place. Thanks very much.
My guest this morning is the independent member for Goldstein, Zoe Daniel. First, let's check what's making news. The recovery continues after the world's biggest IT crash on Friday afternoon. Businesses are counting the cost of the shutdown caused by a faulty update from cybersecurity firm CrowdStrike. Australians are being warned to expect teething issues as systems come back online. A former Victorian Justice Department secretary has been appointed to lead a review into the state's construction sector after the damning revelations about the CFMEU. Premier Jacinta Allen says the review will make recommendations within 6 weeks, including on any legislation needed to stamp out what she calls a rotten culture. The Sunday Telegraph, meanwhile, reports the CFMEU's New South Wales boss, Darren Greenfield, is threatening to release the names of MPs and public servants he met before the last state election. And finally, the New York Times reports the Trump campaign is preparing a major effort to attack Vice President Kamala Harris if President Biden steps aside. The Republican presidential nominee has also just addressed a campaign rally in Grand Rapids in Michigan. Let's go live now to the ABC's US Bureau Chief, Jade MacMillan, who's there in Washington. Jade, look, thanks for joining us after a pretty incredible week. I know you've been covering it all. What's the latest on Joe Biden? He's still digging in, but is the pressure rising for him to go?
Well, Joe Biden is still isolating at home in Delaware. We've had another update from his doctor today who said that his COVID symptoms are improving. But politically, the president is still under such enormous pressure. There are now more than 35 Democrats in Congress, both in the House and the Senate now, who are calling for Joe Biden to withdraw from the election. We haven't had any of those really influential figures within the party, like former Speaker Nancy Pelosi or former President Barack Obama, actually coming forward yet publicly and saying that Joe Biden should step aside. But there is so much reporting here in the US about concerns they are apparently expressing behind the scenes, that pressure only continues to build, even as Joe Biden insists that he's not going anywhere and will be returning to the campaign trail next week.
And what happens if he does actually decide to go? I know a lot of discussion about this. Is it clear that Kamala Harris, the Vice President, would become top of the ticket?
I think that is still very much an open question. Would Joe Biden, if he dropped out, get behind his vice president, make it clear to the party that Kamala Harris would be at the top of the ticket? Or would there be an open contest, any number of candidates putting themselves forward ahead of the Democratic convention next month? There was a rally here earlier, Spearsy, outside the White House. It was a small but vocal crowd. This event was organised by a group called Pass the Torch, which is running TV ads now calling on Joe Biden to withdraw. They won't say where they're getting the money to do that. But there was a mix of voters here, Democrats and independents who don't want to see Donald Trump return to the White House. And they were split in what they thought was the best way forward, whether it should be Kamala Harris or whether there should be an open contest.
There's 3 months left, and it just shows that they should have been more proactive. So I will criticize them on that, but then now they have the responsibility to pick someone else for the American people that's going to represent the American people.
I think America needs to get ready for a woman president. I think that they were ready for the first Black female, Asian American vice president in 2020, and I think they're ready for her to sit in the Oval Office today.
Amazing. Look, Jade, it's been such an extraordinary week. I know you were in Butler, Pennsylvania after the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. You were there covering in Milwaukee, covering the Republican National Convention, where he was formally given the nomination. He announced J.D. Vance as his running mate. He's just done another rally in Grand Rapids, Michigan. What have you made of this week for the Republican Party and where it leaves Donald Trump and J.D. Vance?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to get your head around exactly how much has happened in the past week, but what was really clear at the convention in Milwaukee was just how much the Republican Party has rallied around Donald Trump. He already had that very strong support from his base. People there really gave him a hero's welcome at that convention in the wake of the assassination attempt. But to see people like Nikki Haley, the former UN ambassador, who was Donald Trump's last remaining rival for the nomination, who didn't endorse him when she dropped out, but seeing her added to the speakers list and giving the former president her endorsement in a very public way was another sign of that. My colleague Carrington Clark, who was at that rally in Michigan, also says that the line to get into that arena was several blocks down, that not everybody got in. Now, I think as this week shows, anything could happen between now and November, but Republicans I spoke to in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin certainly felt like the momentum was on their side, especially given the turmoil that is facing Democrats.
Jade MacMillan, thank you very much for the update there. We will come back to the momentum shift in US politics and why this matters for Australia. We're going to start, though, on the crisis at the CFMEU and what's being done about it. I'm joined this week by Raf Epstein, Karen Middleton and Shane Wright. Very good morning to all of you. Look, Raf, you only have to look at court judgments and many media reports over many years to know that when it comes to the CFMEU, these problems aren't new. However, the 60 Minutes program, the 9 newspapers have presented some new evidence and packaged it together in a way that it's pretty stark for all to see. What have we learnt this week?
Look, the details are spectacular. You have someone going from an underworld shooting to hospital in a taxpayer-funded car from a big build website. You have specific details of people that have gone directly from outlaw motorcycle gangs, they're patch members of bikie gangs, into significant union positions. And what Nick McKenzie and 60 did really is you lay out that map where the organised crime figure benefits from the militant unionism, and the EBA stamp of approval from the CFMEU means the organised crime figure gets 10 guys onto a site for a few years, that's millions. They get 100 guys onto a site for a few years, you're talking about tens of millions of dollars. So spelling out that detail, that's where the power comes from.
Karen, what do you think we've learned about the problems there?
Well, we've seen, evidence of meetings between people or companies that want to get involved to get a piece of the action, directions that, you're going to have to pay money to get an EBA, we'll bump out the blokes that are doing the job now, we'll move you in, the suggestion that companies that even didn't have the equipment to perform the work were being given jobs and having to buy or borrow the equipment from the companies that had been bounced out. So there's clearly allegations of a whole layer underneath of kickbacks and favours and standover that hasn't been publicly visible to this extent.
And Shane, all of this and the forcing out of genuine competition forces up prices for all of us.
It does, like some of the intimidation, like the MBA chief executive in South Australia who said he'd had a Kermit the Frog puppet decapitated stuck on his front fence.
Goodness.
Tells you like the level of intimidation that goes on. But you're right, in terms of the economic factor, it may not be built into like suburban households, but so the huge contracts that say the Victorian government and the New South Wales governments have been involved, they're big, huge builds. There is a cost factor that every taxpayer is being forced to pay because of what's going on in the CFMEU.
And there are lots of questions about who knew what and when. You mentioned Nick McKenzie, the journo who broke this story, did the 60 Minutes piece. I did speak to him for the Insiders on Background podcast during the week at length about all of this. He reckons the Victorian Premier, Jacinda Ardern, absolutely knew about what was going on.
No doubt about it. And they weren't anecdotal. We have a letter to her and her response, and that letter stands out for this reason. It contains transcripts of the violent threats you played at the start of this podcast, transcripts of those violent threats and standover by CFMEU organisers, plus, critically, a CFMEU organiser saying basically we control the big build, and if you ain't in with us, you ain't getting on the big build jobs. Albanese, through his channels, knows about what's been going on. I know of senior Labor people. I mean, in the last 6 months, as we've investigated this, the consistent comment from senior ALP ministers and insiders is, we know what's going on, keep going, because it's corrupt and rotten. And by the way, Albo knows about it, and he does not like what's going on. And when the evidence is incontrovertible, we think that the Prime Minister will act.
If you want to listen to that full conversation with Nick McKenzie, the QR codes are there on ABC Listen app or ABC iView. The point there, Karen, that Albanese wanted the evidence, or at least wanted the media reporting, to expose this, to be able to do something.
It's pretty hard to find anyone in the federal government that isn't happy that this has come out into the open. And the biggest problem, I think, that they had in trying to act against it at all levels of government, aside from the structural issues that integrate the unions with the Labor Party, and there's a question about the money that comes, is that this is a massive union. It has a huge number of members. It has an enormous amount of power, and they looked after their members. So their members were happy. So trying to take action against a union without the public buy-in, without being able to present the evidence in public, has clearly been difficult. Now, there'll be long arguments about whether people could have and should have done things sooner, and I think they probably could have and should have, but that in the end is the problem. The unionists, the members were happy, they were getting pay rises, they were being looked after, and all this other stuff was going on sort of on, over the top.
Raf, you're there in Melbourne, people scratching their heads going, why wasn't more done about this?
Well, it's easy to say, everybody knows why wasn't more done. There is no doubt this is Labor's problem to fix. Labor benefits from the CFMEU. It's one of the biggest union contributors. Few things to mention, though. Most of the allegations detailed in 60, they happen after the third Royal Commission in my lifetime looking into criminality in the construction industry, and while there is a tough cop on the beat, while the ABCC are there. It is not easy. I don't think police enjoy doing these investigations. They require probably hundreds, if not thousands, of man-hours. There are good reasons for why things haven't been investigated. At the same time, why do you need details like this for people at a state and federal level, especially the state Labor government in Victoria, to go, right, we need better whistleblower protection? Everyone knows that there have been claims for a long time There has never been, and it includes under the coalition, there's never been a watchdog piecing together complex web of industrial relations, EBAs endorsed by the CFMEU, piecing together that, when is it militant unionism and when is it to the benefit of organised crime?
Well, this thing, I want to come to that, whether bringing back the ABCC is the answer or some other type of oversight here. I want to come to that. What is happening, we know, is administrators are going to be appointed, although, Shane, it's a bit of a bumpy path. You can't just snap your fingers and make it happen. It does look increasingly like the CFMEU is not laying out the red carpet for the suits to walk in the door. The government might have to legislate this.
I think that, and I think that would happen relatively quickly once they'll get the legislation in. The Liberal Party cannot oppose it, for instance, so that will move through the parliament fairly quickly. But you're right, and we're talking about an organisation that thinks it is the be-all and end-all of power, particularly in Victorian building sites. Of course it's going to resist, but this is where the test is, particularly on Tony Burke, it's on Jacinta Allen, it's on Chris Minns, how hard to really take action.
And do we know what those administrators will be able to do?
Section 323 of the Registered Organisations Act.
Just happen to have it right here.
Yeah. Well, no, I rang out and tried to find out. Administrators can do anything. They can reorganise the financial affairs. They can change the union officials. They can bar people they can do anything to make the union effective.
And this is important because it doesn't require a law to be broken.
You don't need to know that someone's got mates who are criminals. You just need to say that your involvement in that EBA is against the effective running of the union. There might be legal challenges.
Is that contestable? Yeah, I was going to say. If you're booted
how
out the
deep
door,
are their pockets, and how much cooperation are there going to be? So I think there are clearly decent people in the CFMEU who've probably helped kick this investigation along, by Nick Mackenzie. Who wins out in that battle? The administrator's going to try to do something that we did not achieve with 3 royal commissions and two goes with a building and construction.
But Karen, it's hard to imagine it's going to be that straightforward. I assume there will be a lot of fights about who gets shown the door.
We're going to see very lengthy, probably legal proceedings.
Yeah.
Can you imagine the CFMEU says, oh yeah, okay, no worries. No, I don't think so.
And you got Darren Greenfield, the CFMEU boss in New South Wales this morning, saying, I'm going to name names about all the Labor people who didn't have a problem with
Which is where the administrator comes in handy as the person who goes, right, no, I'm going to go hard myself. So it gives you have a different power base inside the CFMEU. So you're pushing those, like the SECCA's already gone, but you're talking about those who are still there. You've got a power base against.
So this is where I think there is some validity in the argument that actually it's a more effective tool having an administrator than just trying to deregister the union, because then it continues to operate sort of outside and you don't have the external force actually looking and scrutinising inside.
But also, at a state level, and this, by the way, a lot of the allegations in 60 Minutes, that happens under a state Liberal government, right? So I think that the problem is, the reason this has not been effective, this has been weaponised. It becomes way too political. What you need are the big contractors on big on big projects in every state. They need to, when someone comes to them and says, oh, they want to put 3 patch members as the lollipop guys, what happens right now? I suspect people just shrug their shoulders. They need to feel confident, excuse me, they need to feel confident if they raise that with someone, it will go somewhere. It's a difficult thing to investigate.
So the Liberals are saying deregister the union like Bob Hawke did back in the 80s. Tony Burke, the minister, says that simply won't work these days.
If we simply went down the deregistration path, we would have an organisation still capable of bargaining and doing the entire business model that we've been seeing reported over recent days, with no layer of regulation or additional oversight that applies to registered organisations. It would be a gift to the worst elements, and I have no intention of going down that path.
Yeah. Is he right?
One of the great examples from Nick's work, someone gets the stamp of the CFMEU EBA on the Friday, sells it on the Saturday. There's nothing illegal about that. There is nothing wrong with doing that. You can link it to as many intimidation and threats as you like. There's nothing criminal about that. We've never tried an administrator. We've never had the union taken over by someone who's impartial to try to break that pattern. And the administrator, my understanding is, they can change the way the EBAs are negotiated, change the way they are ordered. It's cartel behaviour. It's been going on for decades.
We've had deregistered unions before. The BLF, they keep referencing Norm Gallagher and the BLF. And you can see that, like, the shards of it just kept going.
But a deregistered union these days can do EBAs.
They can make
That's right. So look, what about the ABCC? I mentioned Peter Dutton is wanting to bring back the building industry watchdog.
We'll reintroduce that legislation for the building construction watchdog when we go back to Parliament in August. We hope the government can support it because they abolished it at the request of the CFMEU.
And look, the government's line we've heard is, oh, well, it didn't do much. It was a civil agency. It just,
well, it didn't.
It's more concerned about flags flying than actual serious
maybe there's an argument for a watchdog in that sector, but what did it do? That's the problem.
So some other type of watchdog.
Well, it needed more teeth if it was going to function properly. It was pinging people for having, rude stickers on their helmets and whatever. But did it do anything about the sort of allegations we're hearing? Did it bring any of that forward?
Well, you go to productivity levels, and you can see the year the ABC starts, productivity started falling. So I don't think at the ABC that it never achieved.
Can I
stated
as an
claim.
ABC person, ABCC.
Sorry, ABCC. But look, it can be very close,
But so what's the answer here? If these problems have been around for decades, the ABCC's not sharp enough to fix it.
Isn't the asset on Labor? The asset is on Labor. They're in government now.
Yeah.
Right? They've got a chance to fix this. They are the most compromised by this politically. It's very. Then when the PM came on the radio with me at the start of the week, he didn't just say outright, I should not be accepting money. He left that to the executive. When the coalition comes on, Bridget McKenzie says it's not our fault this stuff happened when we were in power. It's the fault of Labor because they didn't vote for our
what happens now?
Well, there are too many vested interests in this sector. It's all vested interests, isn't it? Don't forget what Labor kept on saying, or those ministers kept on saying all week. Well, in order to pay a bribe, someone has to receive a bribe, and it isn't. They're suggesting, it goes all the way up to the developers and the companies that are involved. So everyone's nervous. So the idea of having an external administrator is an agency that is not a vested interest looking into everything. And this could make all kinds of people nervous.
And you can't keep administrators there forever. No. Presumably they'll be there beyond the election.
You need forward-footed watchdogs headed by people who are willing and empowered to join the dots without having to prove criminal behaviour. And it's a global problem, right? Organised crime getting into government construction contracts and big construction contracts, it's a global problem. Until we have someone keeping an eye on it and empowered to keep an eye on it, which we have not had before.
Properly.
I don't think it'll change.
All right, well, time to talk to Independent MP Zoe Daniel now. I'm going to start, in fact, on the US presidential race, which does have enormous implications for the world. While the Democrats are in crisis over Joe Biden, Republicans are well and truly united behind Donald Trump. In accepting his party's nomination, the former president vowed to drill, baby, drill, rather than take stronger action on climate change. He threatened higher tariffs. He promised to end wars. And specifically, his running mate, Jade wants to draw down support for Ukraine and let Russia keep the territory it's taken. But Australia's ambassador to the United States, Kevin Rudd, says everyone should just chill about the prospects of a second Trump presidency. He spoke to one of his predecessors, Joe Hockey, at the Republican convention for Sky News.
What I say to many ambassadors in Washington is it's really important to chill. Yeah. Just chill. The simple reason is if President Trump is elected on the 5th of November, we're not going over some chasm. For us in Australia, and for allies in the United States, this is a perfectly navigable and manageable set of relationships for the next 4 years.
Zoe Daniel, welcome to the program.
Morning, David.
So how chilled are you at the prospects of a second Trump presidency?
Look, I don't know about chill. I think we need to be prepared, but we also need to simply accept that this is probably going to happen and find ways of dealing with it. It's interesting to see Rudd and Hockey there. Remember back in the day they used to appear on TV together on morning television, I'm sure you do, and they're friends. They know each other. And I would argue actually that during the previous Trump administration, it was Joe Hockey who was the key to accessing Trump. So I think it's notable to see Rudd there talking to Hockey, because I think that Joe Hockey might be quite critical in the mix, because, when I was covering the White House back in the first Trump administration, I sort of described it as all the pickup sticks being thrown up in the air. All the normal pathways for media, for diplomats, for governments no longer existed. And there was a reinvention that was required. And I think the only thing that's predictable about Donald Trump is his unpredictability. And we have to just go into it knowing that and accept that things will be different.
And do you think this is a good thing that Kevin Rudd and, to that extent, Joe Hockey are doing to send these overtures, build these relationships with the Trump team?
Well, you've got to be pragmatic. You know, you have to find ways of having these conversations with Trump, really. At the end of the day, Trump does the hiring, Trump does the firing, and Trump does the signing off and the decision making, and it can be very mercurial, if I could put it that way. Difficult to know what to expect, and you need to be able to get to him, not just to his teams, to the president potentially himself.
Nonetheless, what are your concerns about what a future Trump presidency might bring?
Look, I have a range of them. I think that, you know, it'll be back to sort of where he left off after his first administration. I think anyone who thinks Trump has changed as a result of the assassination attempt is living in a parallel universe. We saw, for example, his rhetoric about winding back NATO. We saw him wind back Barack Obama's initiatives on renewable energy. We saw him pull out of Paris. We saw his unmatched power to reach people in a communication sense and to manipulate public opinion. So all of those things, I think, will be back to Trump Mark 1. I think too, though, that we have this critical point where, because of the weakness of Biden, there is the possibility of a Senate and House changeover, and then that check and balance on Trump will be lost.
Do you think Joe Biden should go?
Well, look, I'm not sort of in the business of giving advice to a US president, but, you know, and I don't need to. I mean, I think that anyone who's observing this would say he probably can't win. I think the chances of him winning are next to nil. The thing is, though, and I've been thinking for ages, way before the debate, that Donald Trump would probably win the election. You know, he's quite extraordinary as a human in his ability to persist. But the thing is, who do you put in now who can beat Trump on the time frame that you have? And I don't think the Democrats can win it, Biden or no Biden.
You mentioned what might happen with NATO. We know Trump's running mate, Jade, is a critic of US military support for Ukraine. He wants to draw that down. Does that concern you about what that might mean for the war in Ukraine?
Well, I think it's just really concerning from a broader geopolitical point of view. If the Americans, in effect, dump Ukraine and that gives the Russians open entry into Ukraine, what does that mean for the rest of Europe?
So you'd like to see that military support continue from the US for Ukraine?
Well, I think it's a barricade against a whole lot of unintended consequences, which is to do with the precipice on which the world finds itself in regard to the fragility of democracy and Ukraine really being the sort of pressure point to retain that democratic position across Europe, but also with the very febrile situation in the Middle East. I think the Americans pulling out of Ukraine could be quite disastrous.
Should the US then also continue military support for Israel?
Well, look, I think my views about the situation in Israel and Gaza are pretty well known. I'm not a fan of the Netanyahu government. I have spoken very strongly about the safety and security of my community in Goldstein, Jewish people who are very frightened. And from that point of view, the Hamas terrorist attack achieved its aim, which was to terrorise people. But I think there needs to be a ceasefire in Gaza, and the parties need to come to the table for the sake of a two-state solution, but more broadly than that, for the sake of regional peace. Once this spills over in a big way into Lebanon, the Iranians get involved, and that's where you get that Russia link with what's happening in Ukraine. That's when things begin to potentially spiral out of control.
Do you think it would help if Australia were to recognise a Palestinian state? Would that help deliver a peaceful outcome?
Well, I've said that I support Palestinian statehood, but it has to be tied to a two-state solution. And I think that in some ways there's an opportunity for the likes of the Palestinian Authority right now to actually step up and prove that they can reinvent themselves to govern. The issue, I think, with declaration of Palestinian statehood currently, and obviously many countries have done it before us, but just the timing of it now, is that the situation is a complete basket case. There's no one there to govern. And you have to get those two parties to the table. The peace and security and safety of Israel and the Palestinians is intertwined. And one can't be safe without the other.
Yeah. Did you have just one more on this? Did you have a view on the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, on Friday ruled that Israel should abandon its occupation of Palestinian territories? It should pay reparations to Palestinians who've lost land and property. Is that something that Australia should support, that ruling, or ignore?
Well, I don't know about ignore it. I think have a close look at it. But, you know, Australia, certainly this government, has been fairly front-footed in regard to Israeli settlements in the Palestinian territories, for example. And I support the position that those illegal settlements should not be happening. That is absolutely inflaming the situation. But I think all of these things are part of that conversation that has to happen when you bring the parties to the table. I mean, getting back to Trump, you'll remember that he put Jared Kushner, Ivanka Trump's husband, in to solve Middle East peace, David, last time he was in office. So, you know, watch this space, because one of Trump's aspirations absolutely will be to end that war because he will see that as a win that he can chalk up.
All right, let's come to issues here this week. The CFMEU administrators will be sent in to help clean up the union. What about bringing back the Building and Construction Commission, the ABCC? You voted to abolish it. Do you think it now should be brought back?
Yeah, so just for the sake of clarity, I voted to abolish it within one of those massive omnibus bills that the government likes to do. So it was the industrial relations legislation that had a whole bunch of other really good stuff in it. And it was a difficult piece of legislation.
So did you think it should go or not?
I don't think it was particularly effective. So I didn't sort of have a strong view that it should stay. I think there's an argument that there should be something. But I think that the ABCC specifically has been so politicised that it's been impossible for it to be effective. That said, I'm not convinced that an administrator will be enough. I hear what your panel, particularly what Raf has said about that. Maybe it'll be enough. I actually think that it probably needs to be coupled with a police, maybe a state federal police task force. So to look at those criminal allegations, dismantle what's there, and then, OK, there needs to be representation for workers in the construction sector, obviously, but the toxic elements of the CFMEU absolutely have to be cleaned out. And so maybe it's an administrator and a police investigation piece, and then a form of watchdog as well. But, you know, I mean, for people in Victoria, David, who've watched, you know, the big build and the Westgate Tunnel and all these sorts of things that just take years with billions of dollars of cost blowouts, I think were just shaking their heads this week. You know, everyone's known to some degree that it's been going on, and it does feel like it's been convenient to turn a blind eye, and it is now Labor's problem. There's risk, and they have to resolve this.
Look, I wanted to ask you, there's been some question just finally here around what the Teal platform will be at the next election. Last time you had Scott Morrison to campaign against. He's not there this time. And some of those issues that you campaigned on, Labor's moved on: climate change, transparency, integrity and so on. What will be the pitch this time?
Well, two things. There is no Teal platform.
Your platform.
Teal's a media construct, and independents operate individually. Secondly, has Labor really moved on a lot of those things? I mean, they've been sort of pathologically unambitious on pretty much everything. Not enough action on climate, sort of, you know, giving with one hand, taking with the other in terms of new fossil fuel developments and squibbing it on environmental reforms. And then from the point of view of the opposition, what's changed since the 2022 election? What's changed in their climate policy? If anything, they've walked it back. what's changed in regard to gender equality, safety of women, women's economic empowerment, and that goes to unions as well, by the way, because the vast majority of union members in Australia are women, and accountability and integrity, whistleblower protection, the effective working of the NAC. We have a NAC. I'm not convinced it's really doing much yet. So what's actually changed? The pitch is you need independence to make the government more ambitious and to make the opposition more ambitious, to make them better, to keep them honest, to make them strive, to provide vision for the country, particularly in an environment where you may well end up with Donald Trump leading the United States, going down a path of isolationism, nativism and division. And we can make a decision as a country not to do that, to differentiate ourselves with a vision for our future. And I'm looking for that from both major parties, and I'm not seeing it.
But listening to what you've just said there, if we end up with a hung parliament, the Liberals haven't done anything much, you reckon, over the last few years. You'd like to push Labor further on various things. It sounds like you'd have to support a minority Labor government than coalition government, yeah?
Well, I'm not going to make a decision on that, 8 months before an election. And I'd like to call it a balanced parliament rather than hung parliament. Let's get away from the negative language. The crossbench is there to make that parliament function more effectively, and I think that's working. And let's see whether they can do better with the policies they put on the table between now and early next year.
Zoe Daniel, thanks very much for joining us this morning.
Thanks, David.
We mentioned energy there coming up. We will look at Andrew Forrest and Fortescue this week announcing their, scaling down some of the ambition around green hydrogen and what that means for the net zero pathway the government has us on. First, let's continue this conversation back to Raf Epstein, Karen Middleton and Shane Wright. Look, Zoe Daniel expressing some concerns there about a second Trump presidency, but pragmatism as well here, Raf, too. So where are we at? Zoe doesn't think Joe Biden has any chance of winning. He obviously thinks he can still tough this out.
Yeah, I mean, it's just enough to make any Democrat in the United States chew off their own arm, isn't it? I actually was in the US and interviewed Joe Hockey when he was ambassador. I think Zoe's right when she says that the Hockey approach and the Rudd approach is probably right. The only hope of influence is the phone call. But it is genuinely worrying that if it wasn't so terrifying, it'd be funny. When Donald Trump says he will fix every disaster and very, very quickly, when he says that hundreds of thousands of immigrants are coming in and that is leading to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Americans, and when you've got a Supreme Court that says he can ring up his Justice Department and affect an election or try to change an election, and that's okay, there's a lot to worry about. But Kevin Rudd's doing what he should do.
Look, we'll get to Trump. We heard from him on Friday and again this morning. But just with Joe Biden, Karen, when you read the reports of Barack Obama, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, I mean, the most senior, most influential Democrats, sure, as Jade was telling us earlier, they may not have come out publicly, but they're not denying the widespread reporting of what's going on. Is it possible for him to go to an election in this environment?
It doesn't seem possible. I mean, I'm not in the American system, but they're building, aren't they? They're building momentum.
It's coordinated. It looks very coordinated.
And where does that end? Well, who knows? But they haven't got very long. And even if they have to wait till their convention, they've got absolutely no time at all. So there's clearly that going on. But I think Zoe is also right. There's a decision, people looking at this are saying, we have to assume Trump is going to win. Kevin Rudd's message, that wasn't a message to other ambassadors. That was a message to the Trump camp. Yeah. Because Kevin Rudd has been a critic of Trump. And so Australia is having to position.
We should note that doesn't necessarily always mean a bad thing. Look at J.D. Vance, who is an even bigger critic of Trump.
Of course. Exactly, but he's doing this deliberately. What we heard from the former president in his speech was, talking about alliances. What we can tell is there isn't going to be the sentimentality around alliances that we've traditionally seen. The whole we've served alongside each other for decades, centuries, we're this close as two countries. It's far more transactional than that under President Trump. Australia can't assume, I think, that those old rules will apply, and they are going to have to think very carefully about how they work with the Trump administration and what it means in very real terms for our military alliances, for our trade, for global security. There's a lot of recalibrating going on, and I agree with what Zoe Daniel said about Joe Hockey. You know, that approach he took was not insignificant. They war gamed, they worked out who was close to President Trump.
They had to use Greg Norman to get the phone number.
They built relationships,
with him.
and that's what they're doing again.
But yes, this is really important. But I'm looking at it through the economic prism, which is exceedingly worrisome.
Why is that?
Well, this week you had an interview that Trump did where he said, look, I'm warning Jerome Powell, the head of the Federal Reserve, don't cut interest rates before November. So earlier in the year, he had signalled that I want to see decisions by the Fed put before me and I will sign off. So we're talking about a huge change in just the terms of how monetary policy is set. His policy around tariffs is terrible for Australia, a 60% tariff on Chinese imports. Where do we send out most of our goods? Our exports are to China. But that has a huge flow on.
He says he can end inflation, cut taxes, get rid of the debt.
This is a guy who left before COVID. The US budget deficit under Trump was $1 trillion in 2019, and then it exploded because of that. There is an inflation problem globally. This is a guy who says, right, we're going to have tax cuts, no spending cuts. We've got the US is carrying 100% GDP debt now. We're in a spot which I don't think even financial markets have quite come to grips.
And Jade Vance, this election was fascinating because here is someone obviously much younger, 39, but if anything, articulates more strongly the protectionism that's at the heart of.
It's a 1960s, 1970s approach to trade. I'll go further back. It's a mercantilist. You're going back 200 years in terms of, like, there are winners and losers. We just want to be winners. And you can see it in the conservative arguments here in Australia. They're looking at the cultural side of things, absolutely makes sense. But the economic things are an antithesis to what conservatives.
So this speech he gave in accepting the nomination on Friday, it obviously followed an incredible week, surviving that assassination attempt a week ago this morning. Along the way, a judge that he appointed throughout the classified documents case against him entirely, so another win there. And then basically this coronation at the Republican convention in Milwaukee, where he is adored by the party now. They're completely united behind him and his running mate. It was a very lengthy speech that he gave, and it did get quite rambling for about an hour there, but he started with a very different tone for Donald Trump. It was slow, it was softer.
Started with a different tone.
Started, yeah, but this went for about, 15, 20 minutes, where he gave this vivid, dramatic retelling of that moment a week ago.
There was blood pouring everywhere, and yet, in a certain way, I felt very safe because I had God on my side. I felt that. The amazing thing is that prior to the shot, if I had not moved my head at that very last instant, the assassin's bullet would have perfectly hit its mark, and I would not be here tonight. We would not be together.
In fact, his physicians released a statement this morning. It was less than a centimetre in metric. Pretty amazing. But then he left the auto cue. It went for like an hour of rally speech, all the greatest
the longest
hits.
acceptance speech in history at an hour 32.
I think in modern history. There's a few things going on there, though. Firstly, it is quite obviously, it is the death of shame in American politics. He will say anything. It was a complete policy vacuum, actually, that speech. And they will sell their grandmothers to line up with him. Jade Vance called him a Hitler. Kevin McCarthy, people like that came out again. And, Mitch McConnell, they come out against him after January 6th. They are all there on the convention floor. They do not care. It is a cult of personality.
Someone described it as this week in Milwaukee, the funeral of the Reagan Republican Party. This is now, and picking J.D. Vance is about the future of
this kind
of Republican Party. So.
And he's a much more effective speaker in some ways.
Sure.
Can I just double back briefly to Biden to on the difficulty of removing him? Because you had Zoe Daniel, and I hope people in Australia don't get offended by this, but you've got a Democrat Party that is basically like having the Greens plus the Independents plus Labor all in one party with no one in charge. And that is why it is so difficult. And even someone like Nancy Pelosi, who they always talk about her ability to play 3D chess, and she gave that interview where she says, if the president decides he's going to keep going, and then she sends out Adam Schiff. If Nancy Pelosi is struggling to blast him out, that shows you how difficult.
And you've seen the likes of Bernie Sanders, who are on the left end of that, saying, "Oh no, Biden should stay."
Yeah,
so that is running.
Could be an interesting few days ahead. Look, let's turn to this cyber outage that struck Friday afternoon, and we're apparently still recovering from it. The ABC, other broadcasters, airlines, banks here and around the world affected by this. What happened?
Isn't what happened that the thing that is designed to protect you from this, that is how they make their money. That is
cybersecurity software.
Dominant. It is supposed to stop this from happening. They send out an update, and I think it's either 73 or 8 minutes between the update that's got the bug in it and then the fix. So they get the fix out there just after an hour, and everything falls over.
It was the intersection between antivirus software from this company CrowdStrike and Microsoft software. So it was organisations that had Microsoft software, as I understand it. This antivirus update came in. Somehow the intersection of those two things with the bug in the update caused chaos. Now, it wasn't a cyber attack, but if you're a nefarious actor who's thinking about that kind of thing, you'd be watching what happened, wouldn't you?
Yeah,
you'd be looking at who got affected. You'd be looking at what level of chaos just one bug in antivirus software could cause. You'd be taking note of which organisations, which airports, which media organisations, which public service providers were affected.
Look, fortunately, I think the government's happy that no critical infrastructure was knocked out. But it goes to, I mean, people always say, well, what can we do to prevent this happening again? It's just the reality of this interconnected digital world we're in now, that this stuff can happen.
This goes to my argument is that we have seen 3 huge supply chain breakdowns in the last 15 years. The GFC was a breakdown of the supply of credit, and you saw what happened with that. COVID was the supply of goods. Like, we couldn't get PPE, we couldn't move. It just broke that supply, and it's playing out in the inflation figures continually. And this one is a breakdown in the supply of IT protection.
And services, therefore.
And services. So this shows to the interconnectedness.
We're too reliant on a small number of...
Well, the world is built upon the fact, like, we're the wealthiest we've ever been as a society. And it's partly because of the interconnectedness and the way that we're able to move. But it is, I think, to go to a point that Raf might make, this is a feature, not a bug. And this means that anything can bring us down. So the importance of bringing...
the issue, isn't it? Like, they are updating regularly every day to stop this from happening. They can't be perfect when they do that. If a fifth of the world's PCs have got this software, somewhere along the line, they're going to produce a bug. And we all saw the result on Friday.
Andrew Forrest has shelved his ambitious target to produce 15 million tonnes of green hydrogen a year from 2030. He's scaling back a number of global hydrogen projects, but he insists he's not quitting green hydrogen.
We're not backing off green hydrogen. We're doubling up on green energy, Sarah. This is because if you walk away from green energy, you're going to walk away from the future of your kids. We are committed.
Now, the government says there are still plenty of other $200 billion in the pipeline, green hydrogen, other hydrogen projects there. This won't affect their pathway to net zero, which does involve some reliance on green hydrogen. Peter Dutton, though, reckons this will have a big impact.
Green hydrogen is actually what they're saying will be the firming up power for renewables. It's not going to happen.
1 in 10 Australians don't let their dogs see them naked. Do you?
He obviously thinks nuclear is the answer there. What does this green hydrogen move from Fortescue mean?
I think it's dangerous for the government because a lot of people's eyes glaze over when you talk about the detail of energy policy. And what Peter Dutton is trying to do is to sort of have a simpler conversation. And this helps him with his simpler arguments because he can suggest that it's undermining the confidence you can have in a transition to renewable energy. So he does this on the detail and just talks in the broad, and I think that's what you'll start to see him doing as a result of this. Look, see, we told you the whole move to green energy isn't on a firm foundation, and they won't necessarily hear what Twiggy Forrest says about, no, we're still going for green energy, we're just making these changes for these reasons. That people won't hear that.
But this was a private company, not Prime Minister Peter Dutton saying, oops, sorry, the nuclear power plant's not going to get built and we won't have power.
In fact, they weren't benefiting from the government's hydrogen program. And the other thing too,
but he's sort of the face of the most enthusiastic green hydrogen backer.
He's the face of it, but hydrogen's not the most important thing. If you look at the detail and you look at the 2,100 people
God
who actually
forbid we
speak to
should
the
look at
market
the detail.
operator and you look at the integrated systems plan, it's the smallest part of what we need to rely on in 2050. You're right, Peter Dutton knows how to weaponise it, but actually nuclear and hydrogen, they're niche products.
Yeah.
Neither of them are part of the solution. I would much rather both our major political parties focus on the hard stuff, which is just, we've got the technology for a lot of the renewables and the hydro and the batteries. We've got to work out how to get it out there more quickly.
Yeah, well, look, gas, clearly, if we're not seeing green hydrogen come along, gas is still going to be that backup source.
Gas is going to be a part of it.
For years and years and years. But as I say, the government's still very confident that all these other green hydrogen projects will come off.
Well, I mean, Peter Dutton's got one. I think he's got one point. I struggle and this is a humble brag, but I do have a university physics degree. They are fighting the laws of physics a bit.
Explains a lot, Raf.
Thank you very much. But it is difficult to rip the water apart and create hydrogen gas and do it cheaply.
Sure.
It's only going to be something that you can use when there are batteries there. Where I feel a bit of trepidation when the government talks up hydrogen. It's a niche product. It's not a
there are smart minds, Alan Finkel and others who are all...
They do?
Look,
Yeah.
I want to show you this because it just snuck in quickly there. Sometimes we wonder, I think, whether we really know enough about our politicians, and then sometimes, thanks to Karl Stefanovic, we find out far too much.
1 in 10 Australians don't let their dogs see them naked. Do you?
What was the question?
Come on, Bill. Do you get naked in front of your dog?
No. 1 in 10 dogs. Oh, listen.
1 in 10 dogs are naked.
My dog's naked all the time. Yeah, okay. Yeah, why not? Yeah, that's true. I mean, I love my dog. And my dog, he never gives up a secret. He's never ratted me out ever. He's the loyalest friend I've got in politics.
All right, Pete, you quickly.
Well, Carl, I was just happy that Bill went first. But even with all that time, I still can't think of a response. I'm sorry.
All right.
I love Ralph too, but not in the same way Bill's talking about it.
Too much information.
What's the old saying? Never work with children or animals. Even talking about them can be their problem.
All right, our panel, Shane Wright, Karen Middleton and Raf Epstein, will be back very shortly with some final observations. Time now for Mike Bowers and Talking Pictures.
I'm Mike Bowers and I'm photographer-at-large for The Guardian Australia. I'm talking pictures this morning with columnist for The Australian, the one and only Jack the Insider, and a very warm welcome to a very chilly Canberra morning.
A very cold and grey Canberra day, yes.
Yeah. Jack, it was a case of the CFMEU as the politicians tried to distance themselves from the stink that is.
It's a complete shock. No idea that this was going on.
I know, right? It beggars belief that politicians didn't know that there was something slightly off. Beautiful, Matt Golding. Can we build it, says Bob the Builder?
If you're okay with standover tactics, verbal abuse, kickback offers, physical threats and dealing with outlaw bikies, yes, you can.
Yeah, yes, you scam. Dean Alston has channeled Stan Cross. Stan very cross at this point. For God's sake, stop laughing. This is serious. Who's laughing, says the CFMEU.
CFMEU, the construction division there, struggling a bit there. Hang on to the lawyers.
Beautiful David Pope, Jack. He's got the easy riding. It's born to be reviled.
Right.
And what sort of margins have you managed to clip, as the government Big Four consultancy says?
Saying it out loud.
Not saying it out loud.
Goddamn weekend riders.
You guys are amateurs. A lovely Kathy Wilcox cartoon who's got the ALP just sort of poking the CFMU.
Prod that out the door.
Shocked.
I'm shocked. I can't believe it.
I did love this Jim Pavlidis, the deconstruction. He seems to think there's a few letters too many in CFMEU, and he's dropped the C, the M and the E to
just leaves us with FU.
Which must mean fund us?
Something like that.
Yeah. Last Sunday, Jack, there was a shot that was heard around the world, and the world is still trying to work out what it actually means.
Yes, an assassination attempt on Donald Trump.
Yeah.
45th President of the United States. And of course...
trying to be 47th.
Joe Biden, of course, said that this is not who we are. There's a long history that says it's precisely who you are.
Yeah, and David Rose picked up a bit on that. He's got Uncle Sam here sitting with the gunslingers, the Second Amendment, and he's sitting on the steps of all assassination attempts. And assassinations. Reagan
there, well, presumably either that's Bobby Kennedy or JFK,
both,
and that's
Lincoln.
Bobby. Ford, number of attempts on his life.
McKinley.
Garfield was assassinated in office. Lincoln, of course, assassinated in office, as was William McKinley.
It's a really sad legacy.
Yeah.
Mark Knight has used that iconic image, which will forever be the image of Donald Trump.
That's the ultimate image. And,
Yep, you've been shot, Mr. Trump.
And I think you've just won the next election. Well, the betting markets have got him at $1.33 last time I looked, which was yesterday. So he has become a very short price favourite.
Yeah, right. I did love this Glenn Lelevre. He's got the world as Vincent van Gogh here with the bandaged ear.
Yes, indeed, yes. And that bandage has become the accessory of the moment.
Ryan Lizzer has tweeted this. It's catching on, especially in the Arizona delegation, who all have ear.
Yeah, I believe it's sort of everywhere at the RNC.
Brett Lethbridge seems to think that it was a survival instinct, and the Secret Service here are criminal charges, January 6, character flaws and 2020 loss.
Trump is an instinctive politician, and he realised that this was the best way to go, of course.
Warren Brown has vote yearly, vote often. The eyes have it, no, the ears have it.
There you go.
Vote 2024.
Very nice, Warren.
Matt Bissett Johnson has you only have 8 lives left. He might have used
maybe used more than one.
Kathy Wilcox has chimed in on the running mate.
J.D. Vance.
Yeah. Senator Vance, you reportedly described Donald Trump as an idiot and America's Hitler.
And I look forward to working with him.
Like, don't praise him, just attack him, and he admires strength.
Maybe he does. Think he's gone there for the blue-collar vote with J.D. Vance?
Yes.
Really got no experience in terms of government at all.
Jack, pretty tumultuous events. Thanks very much for helping me unpick them.
My pleasure. And it's back to you, Spearsy.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Mike. Let's get some final observations now. Shane.
Two female economic writers in this country are as rare as hen's teeth. I am losing my partner in crime, Rachel Clun, this week. Good luck, Rachel. Talking about economics, Michelle Bullock will be giving a speech in Armidale, where she came from. In August, she has gone 9 months without a speech. Longest run of a governor not giving a speech. If you think they're not important, Bernie Fraser announced a 2 to 3% target in a speech. Phil Lower said, we're going to start cutting rates the week after the 2019 election campaign. These are really important for
Shane wants his
governors.
speech.
I want to see a speech from Michelle Bullock.
All right. Karen.
The government's about to roll out an advertising campaign against elder abuse. Now, obviously, these kinds of issues are more prevalent in times of financial stress, and the research shows that 2 in 3 people who experience it never talk about it. It's interesting these ads are actually not targeting the people who are experiencing, they're targeting everyone else, because most often it is adult children that are responsible for this kind of behaviour, and it's targeting the rest of the community to start a conversation. Most interesting, though, the ads don't start till next Sunday, but they're starting to talk about it this Sunday. It's a tricky area. They're worried about traumatising people by raising the conversation, but they feel it's a conversation that needs to be had.
Yeah, it certainly is. Raf.
There's a crane 200 metres from this studio with a huge CFMEU flag on it. They are an empty, selfish organisation. They did not stand down their leaders when they were accused of incredible criminality. We had a coalition launch a Royal Commission that was more interested in Julia Gillard's renovations than in uncovering corruption, and we've had state Labor and Liberal governments, but state Labor governments not interested enough in whistleblower protection. This has got nothing to do with electoral politics. Public are sick of it. Four Corners, 7:30, 60 Minutes, The Age have been reporting on it for decades. It's Labor's problem right now. Labor has to fix it. People expect them to fix it.
All right. Thank you all very much for that this morning. Finally, a shout out to all the great television directors out there. Sometimes they know exactly when to cut to the wide shot. We'll leave you with this wonderful example. Thanks for watching.
The bottom line to every single thing that's going on in this great country today is one thing. We become totally unhinged if Donald Trump is not elected in November.
You're making us all feel very excited about being here.